Hi, today we're going to talk about automated replenishment in Acumatica. And so let me jump over to my Acumatica screen. Automated replenishment in Acumatica means being able to set parameters on stock items that let the system determine what needs to be reordered when stock levels reach a certain point. And so all of that is controlled at the stock item level. So let's pick a stock item. Actually, I'm gonna pick one that I was just working with. So we're gonna pick the Graco Pack and Play to start off with, and I'm gonna pull up that inventory item. Because it's not on that screen, it's here. So automated replenishment settings can be set up in a couple of different places. It can be done at the high level on the item class. So when you set up item classes for each of your groups of items, there's a replenishment settings tab on there that you can set in your min and maxes and your reorder points and those sort of things so that when you create a new part number that has this item class, it will pull in these replenishment settings by default. So this is a high level way of setting it um, for everything that has a particular item class. I'm not going to focus here. I just want to show you the different levels that replenishment settings can be set on. So if you set your replenishment at the item class level, when you come in to your stock items, there's a replenishment information tab, and that's where that information is filled in. And you can have different types of replenishment classes. They could be based on seasonality. If you need to order more during certain seasons than you do in other seasons. So there's a variety of different ways that you can control what shows up in your suggested purchase orders by setting different types of replenishment settings. So this item that we're looking at today, it has a replenishment class of purchasing and it has a replenishment class of transfer, meaning that this part can be purchased and it can be transferred from another warehouse. And those two things, when you determine which one of those classes is in play, your safety stocks and your reorder points are different. They have set them up to be different. So you can set replenishment classes at the stock item level, or you can go to even more detail and set them at a particular warehouse level. So if I look at the warehouse details tab for this stock item, it's available in two different warehouses, in the retail warehouse and in the wholesale warehouse. And you can set different replenishment settings in each of those warehouses. You can also set at the warehouse level different pricing, different costs, and those sorts of things. So if I open the item warehouse details screen for this item, I'm now looking at the retail warehouse for this item. And under the replenishment tab, this warehouse, if I'm refilling this particular item in this warehouse, it's done through a transfer process. So that replenishment class that we were looking at before of transfer is tied to the retail warehouse for this part, which means that when I need to reorder this part for the retail warehouse, it's going to be transferred. And it's going to be transferred in this case from the wholesale warehouse. So when we look at item warehouse details, replenishment settings, you can define the replenishment class. You can define whether or not there's seasonality. Um, we've set the replenishment source for this part and warehouse combination as transfer, and the replenishment method here is min-max. Now, I'm going to click this override button just so you can see what the other choices are for setting replenishment settings. So seasonality here, they have set up, there's a holiday season, there's a summer season, so you can set seasonality, which means when you hit, so if we go, oh, I can't go there. So within those seasons, your replenishment parameters may change. In this case, there's no seasonality for this part. Your replenishment sources can be purchasing. So if your replenishment source is purchase, that means you're creating purchase orders when it's time to reorder or restock this part. It can be manufacturing, which means if this were a manufactured item and you needed to replenish it, it would be, you would replenish it by making it, manufacturing it. Transfer, which is what this one is. Drop shipment. So if your replenishment is from a vendor or and they're drop shipping it from somewhere else, or if your replenishment is purchase to order is another replenishment source, meaning that if you have a sales order for this part and purchase to order is selected, that when that sales order is open, it's going to tell you you need to go purchase this part. So it's not set to replenish or restock based on min and maxes. You only replenish when you have a sales order for this particular part. Replenishment methods are min max and a fixed order quantity or none. This one is set to min max, which means that down here in the parameters section, you set a reorder point, which is your minimum. So when your stock levels hit this reorder point, you only have 10 left in stock. It's going to suggest that you create a purchase order to reorder them. Or in this case, it's going to suggest a transfer order from another warehouse because that's the type of replenishment that this is. So once you reach 10 left in inventory, it's going to suggest you order more, and it's set with a maximum of 300. So when you do create the order for this, whether it's a transfer order or a purchase order, it's only going to tell you to buy or transfer the amount of parts that you would need to reach 300. So if you had 5 left in stock, it's going to tell you you need to go order 295 pieces in order to reach your max quantity on hand of 300. If this were set to a fixed order quantity, then what it would do is instead of having a min or a max, you would set a fixed quantity and it's going to order that every single time. So if your fixed order quantity is 200, when you reach this reorder point, it's going to tell you you need to go order 200 pieces instead of ordering up to your maximum. So Item warehouse details is the lowest level of replenishment settings. It's the lowest level that you can set your replenishment and get down to the detail of how I want to replenish for this specific warehouse. You can also set your preferred vendor. So if you have a preferred vendor set on a stock item, but for this warehouse you need to order it somewhere else, you can change the preferred vendor for this particular item in this warehouse as well. So replenishment settings, and we're going to follow this particular part through the replenishment process, has a reorder point of 10. So when stock levels get below 10, it's going to 10 or less, it's going to suggest that you replenish this part, and it has a maximum quantity of 300. And so it's going to suggest that you order enough parts to have 300 parts on hand. So that's the item warehouse details. I'll leave this for this particular part and how you would set replenishment settings. So this part is also available in the wholesale warehouse. And just to show you that different warehouses can have different settings, in the wholesale warehouse, when that stock level gets below 10 or 10 or less, instead of transferring it from another warehouse, you're going to purchase it. So the replenishment source is purchase. This is the preferred vendor that you would purchase it from, and it has a max quantity of 2,000. And so when it suggests a purchase order for this part in this warehouse, it's going to suggest you order enough parts to reach your maximum quantity of 2,000. So those are where the replenishment settings are configured and controlled. So you can control them at the item level on the stock item screen. You can control them at the warehouse level by going through warehouse details. And when you're setting up a part, you can actually initially set them up through the item class. So whenever you set up a new item class, it defaults your replenishment settings for each item. So you go about your business, you're selling products, and your stock reaches a certain level, or maybe you have a process where you have a weekly purchasing or replenishment process. This is what a lot of customers do, is they will set certain times that they go in and look at what they need to reorder, and that's done through the inventory workspace and PrepareReplenishment. So what this screen does is it looks at all of your inventory items in all of your different warehouses, and it looks at your min and max quantities and determines what you need to order. So on this PrepareReplenishment screen, you can filter by warehouse. In this case, I'm looking at the retail warehouse, and the purchase date is, if you create purchase or transfer orders, it's the date that it would put on those orders. You can also do some additional filtering by vendor, by item class, by inventory ID, if your list is long and you need to focus on a subset of items that it's suggesting that you order. And so looking at this, we looked at the pack and play part, and we saw that it had a max quantity in its replenishment settings, and it had a reorder point of 10. So when in stock levels reach 10 or less, it's going to show up on this PrepareReplenishment screen and suggest that you reorder it. And we can see here that the quantity on hand is 0. So in this retail warehouse, I have 0 on hand, and it's suggesting that I order 300. And the reason it's doing that is because my max is 300. And uh, so that's what I need to order to reach the stock level. If this, again, like I had pointed out before, if your quantity on hand was 5, it would suggest that you order 295 to bring your on hand inventory up to 300. The quantity on supply and quantity on demand columns will show you if you've got so quantity on supply would be any purchase orders that you or receipts that you have in process that will be resupplying that part in your warehouse. And the quantity on demand would represent any sales orders that you have that are demanding that particular product. So if I look at this item, which does have supply and demand, there are 10 pieces on hand. The reorder point is 10 and the max quantity is 120. I already have 110 on order. So if I look at the fact that I have a quantity on hand of 10 and I have quantity of 110 being supplied through a purchase order already, which gets me to my maximum of 120 pieces on hand, you might wonder why it's telling me I need to purchase 200. And the reason that it's doing that is because you now have an additional demand of a sales order that needs 200 pieces. And if we were just to supply that purchase order with those 200 pieces, it would make your on hand go negative, number one, because you would only have 120 on hand. And so it's telling you that you need to provide enough stock to not only cover the demand of 200 pieces, but still maintain your 120 max quantity. So there's a couple of different, scenarios that you can look at in understanding why the system is suggesting that you order certain things at certain times. So I also want to point out the replenishment source. This replenishment source, we looked at this first item. This is the one that we were looking at before and saw that it has a replenishment source of transfer, which means that for this retail warehouse to supply these 300 pieces, we're going to do it by transferring material from another warehouse. And that other warehouse is the wholesale warehouse. We saw that on the replenishment settings for this part. So when we went to the item warehouse details, and I'll just pop in there again just to show you for the retail warehouse, we saw that it was a transfer is the replenishment source and wholesale is the replenishment warehouse where you're going to get those parts from. And that's what shows up here on the Prepare Replenishment screen. These other two, so that's the first two items are replenished through a transfer process. The last two items are replenished through a purchasing process, and it suggests the default vendor for those items because the default vendor was set up on these stock items. So there's a vendor that it's saying to order those from. And if I process, we'll take this part as an example. If I process this Intel CPU, it's going to create a purchase order for this particular vendor. And I'll walk through both of those processes. And so what happens is I'm just going to do them one at a time. I'm going to first process this, the pack and play, and then I'll come back and I'll do the replenishment source of purchase for this Intel CPU. But on a daily basis, you can actually process any of these line items or all of these line items in bulk. So I could select to process all of them by clicking this checkbox, and the system would create um, transfer orders or suggested transfer orders for the items that have a transfer replenishment, and it would automatically create purchase. It doesn't create the purchase orders. I'll show you what it does, but essentially create purchase orders for the items that are set to purchase. So you can, in one whole process, handle all of your replenishment at the same time. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just do one at a time just to walk you through it. So let's take the pack and play, and I'm going to process. So I have one item processed. And what happens behind the scenes then when it did that, it went out and created a transfer order because that was the item that had a replenishment source of transfer. And transfer orders are, let me go back and show you that again. On the sales order screen, under processes, you create your transfer orders. So if I look on this screen now, create transfer orders, here's the item that I just selected to replenish. And you would see all of the items here that need to have transfer orders created for them in order to replenish. The plan type shows you where those came from. So in this specific instance, all of these items that are listed here were created through the replenishment process that we just looked at. So on the inventory screen, when we did prepare replenishment, on that prepare replenishment screen, the source was transfer, and that's where all of those came from. Other types of records that you might see here could come from a sales order. So if you had a sales order that the items listed on the sales order are coming from another warehouse, not from manufacturing and not from a vendor, they would show up here as well. They would have a different plan type other than replenishment. So these just indicate that these particular items, the orders that we're creating for them originated from that replenishment process. Again, you've got filters. So if you have a long list, you can filter the from warehouse, the to warehouse, to narrow down the list. So looking at the pack and play, it's showing that we want to replenish this from the wholesale warehouse, and we are replenishing the to warehouse of the retail warehouse, and the quantity is 300 because that's what was suggested on the replenishment screen. In the same way that we processed this on the replenishment screen, we'll process the create transfer order. And when I click process, it automatically takes me to the sales order that was created with an order type of transfer. My destination warehouse is retail, and here's the item and the quantities that you would be ordering. And so from here, you would go through your normal sales order process of creating the shipment and going through that process of transferring those parts back to the retail warehouse. I'm not going to walk through all of that at this point. So I want to go back and look at the inventory, the replenishment screen again. And let's look at the purchased item, the Intel CPU purchased item. And I'm going to process this one. And because this is a purchased item, it's going to show up on purchasing and the create purchase orders screen. So just like we went to the create transfer orders on the sales order screen, this is the create purchase orders through the purchasing menu. And here is the item that I just selected. It's showing up for me to create a transfer or a purchase order. And as I showed you on the create transfers order screen, it has a plan type column as well. So here's the record that was created from the replenishment. And here's an additional record that's showing up for a drip tray that needs to be purchased, but this needs to be purchased due to a production order requirement. So this create purchase orders and the create transfer order screen is will show you all requirements in the system that need to be purchased from all their various sources, whether it be for manufacturing, for replenishment, for a sales order. They all show up in the same place and you can process them all at the same time. So if you had a list here of several parts that all needed to be supplied from the same vendor, you could, process them all at once. It would create one purchase order to that vendor, supplying all of the different requirements that you have. So I'm only going to process the Intel CPU at this point, just to show you that when I click process, just like on the create transfer orders, it created the sales order. Here, when I click create purchase order, it opens up the purchase order that it created. It's on hold by default, which is a setting. It doesn't have to default to on hold. It created the purchase order to the vendor that was on this stock item. So the default vendor was Eastcom Electronics, and it put the part, the Intel CPU, on here with an order quantity of 200, which is what was suggested in the replenishment screen. So automated replenishment is a quick and easy way to handle replenishing all of your stock items. It takes, initial setup of defining your min and maxes, or defining a fixed order quantity and determining how you want to replenish those items. And once you do that, preparing replenishment becomes a simple matter of identifying, what the suggested orders quantities are, where they need to come from, and processing them all at once. So I hope this helped you understand a little bit better what automated replenishment is in Acumatica, and thank you for listening.